Are you guys just getting started?
Yeah, we did kind of introductions. John was explaining kind of his framework of what he's been doing, and I was just going over kind of, framework I've been using, with empathy circles, how it came about, and also the philosophical structuring, like training, being for a culture of empathy, kind of relational empathy, so.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay,
and then, Bill?
Yeah. So I think those are great ideas. I think, though, for the purposes of this meeting, we really have to kind of, the way I was approaching it is, again, my relationship with this group also because I started my own one-man political movement, which is sort of an oxymoron, called Occupy, Compassion, and Competence. And so and I just have like one table, and we've sort of incorporated that into with Bob Brown in the empathy, circle, and that's fine. But I think that we need to focus on very basic things. Part of it is like before you would let, and this is to you, Edward, before you would let somebody come out under your banner of the empathy tent and say, okay, let's do this. What competencies would you want them to have? Like, for instance, just, like parameters, no selling. You don't want to all of a sudden say, oh, there's empathy. Oh, and here I'm selling, these hats or something like that, unless it's empathy stuff or whatever like that. But in other words, getting some parameters and then one of the things you mentioned, like, for instance, where your real expertise comes to the fore is when you were talking about just, somebody coming in who's talking very casually as opposed to a contentious empathy circle. I think, John, this is where you would come in. And at least in my framework, I'm just throwing that out. So I wanted to get like a really basic thing down, like what would you need, Edwin, in order to feel comfortable for somebody going out like with their own table under the empathy tent idea? What would that look like? What would you want to see? And also, I think that the smaller empathy, individual stuff is more amenable to a more peaceful and more productive dialogues. And I think it also folds in and supports and actually prevents collateral damage if one of your big media events goes badly or is framed like that where you said, fight breaks out at empathy tent. So that people say, oh yeah, the people of the empathy tent, well, I saw that guy, down the other day, he gave me a stress ball, we talked. Oh, that's not what they're about. And so what I would like to see is that, some of those things popping up as to kind of create a cultural background. And so then for Edwin, sorry, I don't know why. From Edwin, I would say, like, for instance, so you talked about the various different situations. I was a nonviolent intervention trainer for the county since 1994, dealing with violent or possibly violent situations. I could add certainly how to assess a situation, some de-escalation techniques and things like that. But I see that as peripheral to the empathy curriculum. So I really would like to, at this point, like some basic competencies, before you would go. Like, would you want somebody to come to an empathy tent, a larger empathy tent situation before you sent them out on their own? Would you you need them to take, say, John's, kind of not the full training, but maybe the abbreviated training? And I know what Lou, and also somebody was talking about their friend. I think David was talking about his friend in Canada who teaches how to listen, the movie thing. And all those things can be folded in. But for right now, I wonder if you can get a basic competency. What are some basic things you'd want from those people? And then we start with a unit there, and then we branch out.
So a basic competency for taking part in the empathy tent.
Right.
Like you're coming out.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah,
in
please.
response to this? Because I'm hearing something different than what I was expecting. So
Uh,
I hear Bill describing thinking about how to scale empathy tent activities like branding. What does it mean to say that you're part of Empathy Tent, and how are you going to authorize or certify that people are competent in doing this practice, so that if they go off and do it by their own and they're saying they're an empathy tent, you know, that's like part of your brand, and how do you make sure that they're practicing that well? And well, you know, Edwin, you may be interested in thinking about that and talking about that. Maybe that is the focus of this discussion. I thought that we were really talking about, and I guess this is slightly related to this, but I thought we were talking about how to build a training curriculum so that people who come to participate in empathy tent activities have the basic skills. And those that want to take the empathy circle practice, not the empathy tent, but just the empathy circle practice, to learn that and use it in various places, that they can go do that without saying that they're part of the empathy tent and without saying that they're part of Edwin's group or anything like that, but just that there's this practice called an empathy circle. And if you do it, it has this structure, and this is how you do it. And they've got some basic training in how to do that without necessarily belonging to the empathy, culture of empathy organization. Now, maybe, Edwin, maybe you don't want people taking that practice, learning that practice and taking it and doing it without being associated. You know, when I think about Sidewalk Talk, you know, if you go to the website for Sidewalk Talk, and you can watch their training videos, but they ask you to sign up. They ask you to sign a thing, and they ask you to get a health professional. If you say you're going to go do Sidewalk Talk, they want you to, you know, they have certain requirements that they want you to do. So I'm curious to hear, Edwin.
Yeah, it was, well, it was initially, as I was mentioning, it was that, you know, John had said he was interested in training aspects. He's in, you know, being involved in the empathy tent team, interested in the training as well as facilitating, you know, high profile leaders. So initially, this was being a meeting just for us to talk about that. Then Linda contacted me, said she was, you know, she wanted to actually create a curriculum, like, you know, larger scale curriculum for kind of for her core classes that she's doing, and maybe even expanding it, you know. So we started talking about that and how to do that. And then I thought, well, let's get us together to actually talk about that. And then, you know, what would that look like, you know, a larger curriculum. And then, you know, she's thinking, I think, more of almost like an academic type curriculum, but that is experiential, because she was like saying, well, we talk about empathy in our class. She does a disability, you know, classes for, you know, in the social disability work and activism. And so then it was just to start kind of talking about that. But I think it's really the focus is the empathy circle is the kind of the starting point. You know, how do we flesh that, you know, build on that empathy circle is a basic practice that, you know, with the empathy circle, it seems to me that that's like a basic practice that leads into the tools of feelings and needs, you know, that NVC is so much developed. It also leads to getting good at just being a good listener. It leads to the mediation, you know, it leads to different types of facilitation processes, you know, it's like a basic skill. It leads to human-centered design. You get really good at this, it's the first step towards the whole design framework. So it just seems like it's this first step. And so I don't know, I've tried to do this once before and had a group for it, and it kind of fell apart. So, and for various reasons, you know, people have personal problems. They get, you know, I mean, one person had found out they had Pompeii's disease, and were, you know, I mean, serious disease, and somebody else then had personal problems. So anyway, it seemed to be there was some energy for this kind of happening, but being kind of clear around it being around the empathy tent, or more around the standalone curriculum too. So yeah, I'm seeing it more as a standalone curriculum that anybody can do, and that we can also teach, that we can have pieces of it that if we do these town halls with DeSaulnier and these candidates and stuff, political candidates, that it's something we can get out there. So I'm just kind of, yeah, so.
Edwin, would you say what the current structure, as you understand it, the current structure of the empathy circle? Or is
Well, the basic structure is, having small groups, 4 to 5 people, one person speaks, the other person listens, does reflective listening, and till the person feels heard, or, we have a time limit. They're just doing basic active listening. Empathic listening is like the basic, foundation. And then we go around in a circle, with one person speak to someone until they feel heard. The listener then becomes the speaker, selects someone. And it's very much like Dominic's. It's very much like Dominic's, except his is pretty much geared toward the conflict. This is for, even pre-conflict, like just people, connecting and kind of learning these practices.
But it's
So
the speaker, and they pick somebody in the circle to reflect back.
Yeah.
And then just taking turns that way until everybody gets a chance to.
Yeah.
So there we have a basic unit right there. So which I've been trained in, just in basics, as far as the empathy circle and then the practice. And so therefore that's the first lesson, I think. How do you do the empathy? You listen, you do this, you do that. And then what I was hoping from Edwin is to kind of reflect back. Last time we talked about it, you talked about the difference in growth you've experienced over 15 years. So I would ask you to reflect on that. Okay, so when I started, this is what I did, and I did the basic empathy circle. Then I was like savvy enough to realize that I had to alter and I'm putting words in your mouth, and I don't know. But basically, then I was knew enough to alter the technique, whether there was a contentious situation or it was an emotionally, serene situation. And so you see, those are the sorts of skills that I see building. So if you just had just really quickly, what would you want to do? Just lay out those particular parameters that you just set?
Well, there's already, kind of the basic instructions for that. Right. We're looking at creating a video, a training video to introduce it, and then sort of scale up. One thing I've done is like taken a book, like there was Karen Armstrong. She has a book on the 12 steps to compassion. So we actually did a book club, and each chapter became like a meeting. Right, people would read, then we would get together and use the empathy circle process to work through the kind of the didactic material. So that's like another aspect. I mean, that's something like that can overlap with more of an academic kind of a course where you are learning some of the didactic material and then using the empathy circle, process to discuss it. So
being a new person, from that perspective, the perspective I could say is that I would think that for curriculum that you pare it down, make it very simple, and then like these are the basic things, and then we can start to build in those things as they sort of organically come. They don't necessarily, so to kind of respond, I think Lou kind of, it's not mutually exclusive, but I totally own that when I developed this idea, I was thinking of myself going out by myself. So a lot of my ideas are around that. They're not set in stone. However, looking and seeing what you're doing, I think that could be an additional adjunct for people. If they go out in their own neighborhood. It's comfortable. They could just go out in their own driveway and things like that. But
well, you mean like it's a reproducible, people can use the skills.
Right, but that may be a conversation that has to wait further on down the line to where you see it. Although we do have Bob, and I still have my table and stuff, and I'm going to be going out. And so, from time to time, and I'll ask you whether you want me to go out under the empathy tent, if you feel, comfortable with that, or whether I'll go out under my own banner until we kind of come together. So
Okay.
yeah, but that's just basically it. But to really pare down the curriculum, so it's like, okay, so we've got like the first lesson, which is how to do. You listen, non-judgmental. You pick a person and you do that. Then you sort of think about, well, like for instance, how many of these Zoom meetings would you want people to, attend before they would get some mastery? Or how many empathy tent activities would you want people, the experiential component?
Yeah, well, those are things just more to kind of talk about, get everyone's feedback, thoughts about it, see kind of what emerges. And Linda, unfortunately, said she was going to be running a little bit late. So I wanted to get her kind of feedback since she's, so I don't know what you guys think, Lou.
Well, I have several thoughts. So one is just on this last point, I think it is a great idea to try to create some kind of connection between people who want to learn the process and yourself or us, because there's a lot of value that can come from hearing how it goes for those people, like how if they take the material that you have created and they try to go out and do empathy circles, then hearing from them, how did it go? What did they learn from it? That will help us figure out if there are ways we need to modify the materials, and it will also give us an opportunity to mentor them in learning the process more. So I think there's a very important feedback loop that goes in both directions in terms of scaling, in terms of the refining the process and scaling, that I think is very good. I think my own description or understanding of the basic structure of the empathy circle and how it functions and its strengths are a little bit more detailed than what was just described when John asked, well, what's the basic empathy circle? I think the fact that it's not one-on-one, that it's 3 or 4 people, and that when you speak, you ask someone in the circle to listen to you, and they say yes. And by the way, I think that should be a request. Like you say, would you be willing to listen to me? And the person might say, no, I'm not comfortable with that. And then you pick another person. In other words, the person should consent to being then I say, will you listen to me? They say yes. And so I'm speaking and they're listening. And then when they become the speaker, that they pick not the same person going back the same direction, but they pick another person. So there's a thing that happens in the circle where the vectors of the conversation wind up not going directly back and forth, but in different directions. And something happens there with the dynamic. It tends to diffuse conflict, and it tends to put more ideas or more perspectives into the environment, which also helps to lower tension. So those are a couple of dynamics of the circle that I've noticed that I think that make it very strong. So
So consent is crucial, and you like the idea of mixing it up.
What'd you say?
Round robin? Would that be fair?
Yeah, I mean the idea would be let's say maybe you can't
my internet
person more than once or something like that. So the 2 people don't get going back and forth. Back and forth and back and forth.
Mm-hmm. So those are kind of structures and dynamics of the circle. So, and it's almost like what needs to be kind of fleshed out is to go deeper into the nature, because this is like just the starting point. There's so much depth to go into, and there's even after a while the feelings and needs kind of emerges too. You get better and better at it just by doing the structure, for example.
Yes, but I agree with Bill. We should not try to give all of that material to people in the beginning. We should just give them the structure and let them use the structure, not even give them a lot of, I think, a few tips for the facilitator, whoever's the facilitator, and there should be a facilitator of the circle, and a few tips on listening, just like maybe 3, not more than 3. And that's a good place to start. The other thing I want to say is, John has a lot of experience inventing a process and taking that process and scaling it and teaching to other people. So I'm really curious about what he has to say about that for this.
Well, I have just a question first of I guess to Edwin, or maybe to both of you, Lou and Edwin, when, like, the way you normally do it, is it just there's a facilitator who knows about empathy, and then other people, they're not prepped in any kind of way. There's no training per se. It's just sort of people show up and the facilitator just kind of helps guide people to do the process. Is that pretty much it so far?
So my answer to that would be the facilitator lays out the process, describes the structure.
Yeah.
And then the facilitator's role is just to hold the structure, to make sure that people do it. And if they start doing something different,
yeah,
like the listener starts responding to what the person's saying instead of reflecting back, they say, wait, no, we're here to, your role is to do this. And to enforce the time requirements and to enforce but there aren't a lot of things to enforce, just the structure and to make sure people are doing it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then actually, so the one other thing that I have done as a facilitator is if a listener is having a really hard time reflecting back the speaker,
yeah,
I will reflect. I'll say, let me see if I can get what the person is saying, and I'll reflect it back, because
Yeah. So I think this is a little bit different than anything I've tried to do, because before you got on the call, Lou,
yeah,
I was saying how the work I've gone in to do in organizations and like families or wherever, it's more of people aren't coming to me as a public training, but I'm going into some system. And how do I do a bit of a training around that. Like I train people in the observation, feeling, need, request distinctions a little bit. And then how do you do, I call it empathic speaking and listening. So as the speaker or the listener, how do you use elements of empathy to listen and speak and reflect? And so different things that kind of set people up to then use a process. And I have a process that's different than the empathy circle process you're describing, but it's the same idea. It's a process to basically have a conversation. And so far we're talking about something that's a little different than what I've done. I've always had a training component be like part of what you do in order to get to the circle in this case. Mm-hmm. Instead of the facilitator. I mean, if it's just, then to me, it's more like mediation, that I'm kind of facilitating a conversation and I'm helping people learn how to, on the fly, how to empathize, basically, how to reflect. But I think what I'm interested in is, what is there a way to train people? Well, maybe both things actually, but I'm interested in what's the most basic level of training that then helps people be in a circle, and particularly where it's a difficult conversation in the circle. Or for me, it's a different shape of the process. But what's the minimum level of training, not to be a facilitator, but just to sort of be in that circle?
Yeah, that's good. One thing I just want to kind of segue before I forget, pre-agreements. One of the things that I noticed when I watched the video of the contentious, whatever between BAM and everybody, is that, you talked about it, but is there a pre-agreement like for nonviolence? It's like, and I haven't been there enough to see, but like you say, okay, you're coming in here, you're going to be doing this, so we're going to listen, this is what we're going to do, there's no threat of violence, we're talking here. Somehow I think that's important to be, stated explicitly. It may already be done in a certain way, but I think that's an important part of the empathy circle, because it does set people's minds. And also it does set, like, for instance, and it does give you a little protection if somebody says, fight breaks out in empathy tent, and you say, well, wait a minute, this is what we were trying to do, and that's a natural counter argument.
There's a sort of a pre-agreement in that, I've been setting an intention, and actually been saying our intention is to foster a culture of empathy. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't always say it, and that means everyone gets heard to their satisfaction. I think that could even be built been recently been saying, and the intention is
Yeah, I
for
would
us to
suggest
work
just,
together
yeah.
going forward. And so I kind of broke up there, but sorry, what was that?
Yeah. Yeah, just to make that a little bit more explicit. And it's
Yeah, well,
like
that's
saying
it.
my internet.
And then there's also this kind of overlaps with the basic training. I think that John, you're saying that there is a page for how to do the basics of an empathy circle. So it seems like it's just, again, the kind of this basics that is sort of easily reproducible. That I've done this in my family. So we get together and do these family empathy circles, and they're like evangelical fundamentalist, Christians, Trump supporters, and it's actually worked, pretty well, to the point where after Christmas now, not Christmas, Thanksgiving, my sister and sister-in-law and their spouses get together to hold their own empathy circles. And I say, oh, do you need some help? And they say, no, we got it covered. So they're like holding their own circles. And so it's like a basic building block. And I think there's like a training can be set up. And then, there's a whole scale. All this stuff is kind of scalable. All these different pieces are sort of scalable and can be, I kind of see the metaphor of a container. Right, we're building a stronger and stronger container. There's the basic level, and we can keep building that container to make it stronger. And each kind of piece kind of adds to the strength of the container.
Edwin, so I have a question for you, Edwin. John's concern or his thinking about how much training does someone need in communication or communicate listening skills before they do an empathy circle. What is your experience? Because you've done more than anybody else. What is your experience with conversations or circles getting out of control because people don't really have any training? They just kind of come to the circle and they're asked to try to reflect back what they're hearing. And
it depends on the level of conflict in the group. If there's no conflict, I haven't had that much trouble. In terms as the media, it's not as a facilitator being able to hold it, say, just no questions or this, you've seen it, how we've done. There's little things that kind of pop up. But it's kind of using it in contentious dialogues where there's already a really big conflict where people just get triggered and they just totally forget and they start screaming and yelling at each other. There's a whole kind of a scale.
You've been in circles like that.
Oh, with Joan and my sister-in-law. I thought we're going to have this little empathy circle, and they are like screaming and yelling at each other. And you got to do the emergency empathy for each of them to kind of calm them down to get them back on track.
So that's where you're reflecting them back rather than them.
Right. To kind of, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. One of the things that has excited me about this process is that the circles that I've participated in, people do a pretty good job of listening to each other without having any training. And that excites me because it suggests that it's relatively scalable if people don't need a huge amount of training before they start trying to do it. Now, a lot of times the listening, the reflecting back that happens isn't particularly accurate or strong, deep. But, that's where things start. And I think that what I don't know is that if you had a circle that was brought together by a facilitator who wasn't skilled at all, what would happen in situations where people are not hearing each other better? I've always been in a circle where either I'm there or you're there. And if somebody's kind of off track or someone's expressing, another person's trying to hear them, but they've been 2 or 3 guesses and they're not really getting it, a facilitator comes in and says, well, is this what you're saying? And the person says yes. That kind of calms things down or creates more connection. And if that didn't happen, if that facility wasn't there, and what things might just kind of escalate out of.
It's dependent on the facilitator. Like that, the model is really about having a facilitator there to guide the circle. Yes.
Well, that's the interesting question. I don't know that for sure, and it also it depends on the level of conflict
Yeah.
between the participants.
And part of a training could be to create more and more support material where people can watch a video and kind of create, or, you know, have material that they can see what some of the problems are, you know, sort of like a MOOC. I can imagine like an empathy MOOC, you know, massively online course, where you have some introductions and then you start saying what are some of the problems. Like, one of the problems is asking questions instead of, you know, responding. I mean, there's so many different problem, you know, breaks in the empathy that can come up, and a lot of those could be addressed. There could also be like a didactic course where you're kind of going through learning about empathy, that, you know, what the different qualities of empathy are, you know, the biology of empathy, and then coming back and having a dialogue using empathy circle, you know, process as a way of deepening it. So again, it's the container, you know, it can go in a lot of different directions. And I don't know, am I kind of answering that? Does that make sense, Lou?
Yeah, although I think all of that cognitive scaffolding, you know, explaining to people and giving them theory and showing them examples, I think that does strengthen people's preparation.
Yeah.
But I don't think I think this is something you have to learn experientially. You cannot read all of it and then just go do it. You know, you really learn by being in a circle with someone who's skillful, watching, you know, experiencing what they do, and then reflecting on it later. This is the other thing. Just experiencing it doesn't really do it either. You have to experience it and then reflect on it afterwards. What did you see me do? Or what, when you did this, what were you thinking? Or how did you do that? Or, you know, that kind of stuff. That's how people get more skillful. They can get more understanding by reading stuff and seeing examples, but you don't get more skillful except by actually.
But it's sort of like combining, and there's combining the didactic, where you got the didactic, but then you actually have your dialogue using the empathic listening, and you're strengthening the experience in a non-confrontational environment. So you're building the skills, you know, moving towards deeper and deeper conflict, you know, potential. So there's kind of that aspect of it too.
I would say another important factor, which actually I left this out before when I was saying the things I think that are important for the circle. Another very important thing is, what question do you put in the circle? You know, if you put the question, so how are you right now about what happened in whatever the moment of conflict was? You know, let's say there was some disruption or explosion, or two people are excited with each other. You know, how are you right now about what happened then? And so you're directed people's focus to talking about what's going on in them, not their judgments about the other person. Now, some of that may come out, but so I think the focus of the question, you know, and you know, I think in that regard, Dominic Barter's work around restorative circles. So his questions: how are you now about what happened? The second question is, what was going on for you, or what were you trying to achieve when you did what you did back then? And that helps create some understanding for what people wanted, even though it didn't go that way, you know. And the first question is about trying to understand the impact on people, you know, what's happened to them. And then the third question is, do you have anything that you would like to offer or request that you would think would help reconnect people, that would help restore respect and dignity to the relationships? And I think those directing people's expressions towards those things, I think, makes a significant difference in what would happen in the circle, I would think.
Yeah. So it's like each of these is a different component, you know, the intention, the questions, the time. And almost each of them has like a scale, right? Has its own exploration. So having a whole series of questions, and what are the different questions that can be asked, and what are the effects of each one? So that's almost like part of an extended training too, is going into, you know, those questions. It seems to me, but I don't
the
know.
trick is to keep it simple enough so that people can do it.
Yeah.
But providing enough structure though, so it helps guide people towards something that's productive.
Yeah, and be scalable and deepening too. So, well, Linda, are you there?
An admin one. I was like, Linda. Yes, I'm here.
Oh, we don't see you. Your videos.
Okay, let me see here.
Before we move on to something else, I'd be curious to hear what Bill and John think about what we were just saying.
Yeah.
Well, I see in what Lou said the element of what we did. Like one of the things, this is again a little bit more advanced training, but there is a danger in ripping off the Band-Aid too quickly for someone who's really carrying a lot of repressed anger. Like with our kids, we would talk it, but if we all of a sudden we knew, like for instance, that really what the kid was angry about, let's say, was a beating by their parents the night before, then, you know, and they just weren't ready to deal with that. If we kind of like say, oh, well, isn't that, you know, that could be seen as threatening. So what we did, and this is sort of my simplified take on what Lou just said, is we did state how you're feeling, right? Start with yourself, how you're feeling. State what you think. And this is not exactly empathy, but, you know, circle practice, but just you might be adapted. State what you think the other person is saying, and then how do we get together? How do we resolve this? How do we get along with the kids, of course? School day, yeah, I know you hate them, but you're going to see them in gym. What are we going to do about that? So then specific things, so you go with, you know, being heard where you are, where you think the other person is, and what accommodations you can make.
Okay. So I hear Bill, you talking about structure, Lou talking about structure, and I've thought a lot about Dominic's structure for his circles, and the way I think about it is if you don't want to require people, in this case in the circle, to have as much skill or any training, then you need to have a really strong structure for process. What is the process, and have it really. So I hear us talking about all these kind of various ways to think about the structure of the circle, but it still seems like, because people won't have any previous training, it's about some kind of facilitation plus a strong structure that holds the conversation, so that people don't need to have the skills themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So I think these are just really important things. And obviously there's a lot to flesh out. And I haven't thought about this empathy circle in the way that, Edwin, you described it, or Lou, you also. I've done empathy groups a lot in my past, NVC empathy groups. This is a very particular, you know, empathy circle, which I like. I like the simplicity and elegance of it. But yeah, I don't really have anything to add other than I think they're really important things to consider. My interest, though, just to throw out what's a little different than what's been said, is I because of my background and what I find so valuable, the NVC components and needs and the relationship of thoughts and feelings and strategies to needs, I think is such a powerful idea that yeah, it might not need to be first and foremost, and for, you know, in terms of what people would be practicing or doing or learning, but I would want it in there myself somehow, that's a key element of what people are learning how to do, and as part of being in the speaking circle. That would make it very meaningful to me. Without that, it wouldn't be as meaningful, because I so much value people learning about that.
Sorry, John, could you state the main purpose, what that you were speaking with? I didn't quite. What's that important thing?
The basic components of nonviolent communication, observation,
okay.
The distinctions around observations, feelings, needs, requests. Like, there's a lot to NVC that I think doesn't necessarily, I mean, there's a lot of principles and things that people may agree or disagree with, but just in terms of basic distinctions of language and skills, I think those are really important for people to learn. It's like I want to be part of people learning that somehow, but I'm really open to. I think people have tried to teach it and learn NVC in ways that are not very helpful for a lot of people. They get turned off by certain aspects of that, or it feels too difficult or whatever. So I want to minimize the barriers to people doing this, and at the same time, I really feel just so passionate and committed about to those sort of basic NVC distinctions and skills. Somehow at some subtle or not level being part of it.
And John, I feel I have the same feelings as you about that. And I think the way that there are two ways. Well, I think the way I integrate it is as a facilitator who participates in the circle. So this is another thing that's different about the empathy circle, is that the facilitator participates in the circle. So I'm part of the turn taking, and I say whatever I'm feeling, and whatever I'm thinking at the moment. And through my listening, I am demonstrating skills because I am listening for feelings and needs, and I'm reflecting those. And so there's a modeling going on that people. I haven't done it enough yet to know how much it impacts people to see that modeled and whether they start doing some of it also because of what they're hearing. But then I also think that kind of what I would call a second tier of training past the basic learning about the basic structure of the circle and that you are reflecting back, there would be a second level of training about just the listening component. How do you reflect back? What does it mean to reflect back what the person is saying? What are you listening for? And that's where, feelings and needs could be talked about. And requests, well, actually all the things, observations, feelings, and needs could all be part of what you're reflecting back when you.
Yes, you can reflect back what requests you're hearing.
And you could be guessing requests, right?
I'd like to coin a new term here.
Oh, before we go, could we introduce Linda? Bring her into. Hi, Linda. Sorry, we're. Yeah, would you like to? We've been recording this, so you'll be able to go back. I'll put it up online so you can actually watch it and kind of get tuned into the things we were talking about. So if you'd like to just introduce yourself, and we can go around and you introduce yourself. We'll introduce each other, and then you could maybe share a bit about what you had in mind for the curriculum.
Yeah, okay. So my name is Linda Sunderland, and I'm a college instructor in disability studies, and I live in Calgary, Alberta. And I do a lot of mostly online curriculum development, some face-to-face curriculum development as well, presently. But in the past, I have done that extensively for things like this, like workshop type things that you might be planning. Also other areas of study, particularly in psychology, sort of mostly psychology-based things, and also related to sort of disability advocacy, which is sort of my area of most intense interest. So Edwin, I kind of reached out to Edwin to because I'm trying to change some make some structural differences in my face-to-face classes to make them more interactive, have more of an element of empathy and connection relationships within the classroom. And he mentioned that he needed some assistance with this and asked if I would participate. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you.
Bill, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Bill Fuller. I'm teacher of severely emotionally disturbed students for 37 years. I've recently retired.
Yeah, well, I have a son with FASD, so you and I have lots in common.
Okay.
Go ahead, Lou.
So I'm Lou Zweier. I live in Petaluma, California, and I am a filmmaker and a teacher. Teach communication skills and conflict resolution and leadership. I also had a long career in higher education with the California State University system doing technology and learning.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
John Kenyon. I've been involved with nonviolent communication work for about 20 years and co-developed a body of work based on that called Mediate Your Life with a colleague, Mike Lassen.
Okay,
Excellent.
thanks. So I'm not sure how to proceed to catch you up. We had quite a bit of dialogue about the empathy circle, like we had talked about, curriculum, and that there's a page here which I'll put into the link, put a link in where we've made notes, about our discussions, as well as I'm making notes now from this discussion. Plus, we'll have the video to review, and it's like we're talking about how do we create a curriculum or a training, and the core practice that we've been doing is an empathy circle, which is has a lot of benefits, and it can really go. It's very much a doing. It's like what you're talking about, instead of being didactic. That there's a lot of actually practice and learning. So it seemed that could be the core. Would be the core of a training, and how do we kind of build and expand on that? So we've just been discussing the different aspects around the empathy circle process. And
well, I don't want to kind of repeat what you've already done, but from what you told me I think it was yesterday, you mentioned that somebody had suggested that you start with the empathy circle, so you begin the program by actually placing that as this sort of front and center, which makes a lot of sense, because that's obviously what people are there for. I mean, that's what they're familiar with, right? That's what they're going to, if they're going to show up at this, they're going to know a little bit about your work probably previously, and so
not necessarily.
Well, I think it's likely. I mean, it's even if somebody is coming to something like this, the first thing they're going to do is Google you, right? Like Google your organization. They're going to see that the empathy circles are sort of central to that. So they're coming in with that kind of understanding, and it's actually a very good way to sort of draw them in, because you can show them, you're basically giving them an example of how this works and how impactful it can be, because I think that you can see from that. I would say the problem with it would only be that people would feel right at the beginning that might be an uncomfortable way to begin, sort of being thrown into the deep end. So you need to consider that. It might not matter, but I would consider that possibility. So for some people that might be a very uncomfortable way to begin the program. It might sort of make them sort of start out not feeling like they want to be there.
Listening to you, Linda, something that pops up for me is, so I went 2 separate times when Ed went to Berkeley, Cal Berkeley, to meet with groups of students. They were in a particular class to teach them this process. And so we split the students up, and I had a group of 8 students or something like that. And just talking to them a little bit about listening, and then describing the empathy circle process and inviting them to participate in it, and telling to them, you can talk about whatever's up for you, whatever you're feeling right now, or what's something that's going on in your life, and that you might pick something important to you, because it's going to have more meaning for you if you pick something important to talk about. And I was amazed at how easily the students participated in it, and how well they were able to listen to each other. So that's part of what gave me a lot of confidence in the process, and the idea of starting, as you are saying, with having people experience it. With just a little bit of introduction, obviously not no introduction, but a little bit of an introduction.
Well, I also wonder if you could make it make the first one kind of voluntary. So what you're doing is you're inviting certain people to participate, and others to maybe not, be like, I know that there's already an element of sort of people listening, but to maybe listen outside the circle, so that if they don't feel comfortable right away, because everybody's different, that they can kind of, they still get a taste for this, and soon after you will have one where everyone joins, but make it make the first one a voluntary sort of example of how this works. That might be something. I just think about, I mean, I haven't taught this specifically, so I would, you know, I trust your judgment on this. But I just know that with my students, even the first day that I go in, I have a hard time sometimes getting them to participate initially. And a lot of them are very, very capable. They have lots of good responses, but they feel like they need to have a time to get comfortable. So I'm just looking at it from that perspective. I know that lots of times if I step into a new classroom and I say, let's talk about this, and a lot of times the things that we're talking about are quite sensitive. They're quite sensitive politically. They're quite sensitive in terms of our own, you know, sort of shifting paradigms and stuff about what we believe about, you know, about people with disabilities and things like that. And if I bring that onto them too quickly, I get no responses. I have to introduce myself. I have to give them a little bit of time to get comfortable and give them some information so they know, you know, where I'm coming from. That's the only thing I'm thinking about. So, but I think that you're right. It's like, it's a really good, it's so central. It's very important. And there is very much a, you know, it's sort of like something that kind of pulls them in immediately, shows them interest and that kind of thing. So I think it's very good to put it right at the beginning. I'm just concerned about how that might be taken by some students as being a little intimidating.
Something that I think of, so I think one way to reduce the tension or the reluctance might be that initially you give them something very, something that they know well and something that isn't highly charged.
Oh yeah, that's
to do
yeah,
the
sure.
experience with. So yeah.
Yeah. But you know, you're saying like if you give them just talk about whatever you want, sometimes that can be too open-ended even. So maybe if you did give them something to talk about. I don't know. I'm going to try this. Like in January, I'm starting with a new group, and so I'm going to be the first day. I'm going to give this a try and see what kind of response I get, so we can test this out a little bit.
You could start with something like, "What are you hoping to get out of this?" You know.
Yeah.
I did notice that when we were at UC Berkeley, one of the professors there, he brought his students, 12 students, and when he was talking and then kind of saying, well, what does anyone think? That the students were all very holding back, you know, just very quiet. But once we got them in the small groups and talking with each other, it's like there's just this opening. You could just feel this opening, and it's kind of this energy with them, you know, talking about what was going on with them. So.
Yeah, well, and that's the goal, right? Is that we want people to be really on the right page to experience this and to engage in it. So we're trying to get them to engage. This professor, was this group a group that had met before?
Yeah, it was an ongoing class on free speech.
Yeah. So if we're doing workshops, these people may not have met each other before. So this is a completely new situation for them. So keep that in mind, that it's going to be slightly different. That's why I'm going to test it with my class next semester, because I have a group of, you know, students that probably don't know each other and they don't know me. So that's going to be your circumstance.
Yeah, so I was just hearing there is that it's really about comfort and safety. It's like just creating an environment.
Absolutely.
If we're using feelings and feelings, you know, are the needs. It's like a need for comfort and safety within the environment.
Yeah, especially when, you know, this is part of this, and part of a very central part of this. First of all, you're breaking down some very, like, you know, some very hierarchical systems that are very embedded. So people are expecting you to come in and you to be kind of in charge and stuff. So if you're giving it to them immediately, you have to make them feel comfortable with that. So as long as you can, and I do agree that it's a very good way to start. I think that it probably is. I think it's a very good hook. It's showing what you believe is central and important, but just be very sensitive to the fact that there are going to be people in that room that don't feel comfortable with starting out that way. It's like being thrown into the deep end of the swimming pool, and they might need a little bit more introduction, in which case there are options, like, what you've suggested here is give them things that are comfortable to talk about, not charged. You know, maybe make you the first one voluntary, so that people can actually observe and see how it's practiced before they give it a try themselves. Those are possibilities. As long as you just keep in mind that the people that are coming into the room, aren't as familiar with it as you. They aren't familiar with the other people in that room, and there might be some problems with comfort.
Yeah, an example of an epic fail like that is when I first started at my new work, they had this group come in, and they lined us up on two sides on each of the room. They said, all right, remember, nothing leaves this room. And I'd known these people for about a week. And they said, anybody who's been hospitalized for a mental condition, please take a step forward.
Yes.
We don't want that.
Right. And if you want people to open up, you have to make them feel safe, very safe. And so I do consider that's really important. Like it's going to set the stage for the rest of the training, in my opinion.
I agree, and I think that the empathy and the listening is an excellent structural first step for that.
Yeah.
And then the topic is also part of what helps contribute to safety or not. Like the topic they picked for you, Bill, was that was not safe, as opposed to something like, so what are you hoping to get out of this class, or where are you from, and how. What do you? What major are you? Or if it's students, and what are you hoping to get out of this class? That's something they're experts in. They know. They don't have to think about it a lot, and no one can tell them that they're wrong about it. They don't have to worry about being wrong about it, because it all is about who they are. And
you don't want any right/wrong answers.
Yeah.
And I find that actually, and I mean, this is partly because my groups are graded, and this is one of the reasons why I'm trying to get away from that hierarchical sort of way of teaching, is that my students are way more focused on their grades and their due dates than they are on the material.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we try to get away from that, so you don't, like, students will come into a class and they'll think, what is the right answer? What is it I'm supposed to say? Not what is it that I'm really thinking. So we want to get away from that. So you're right. Ask a question that doesn't have a right answer. Sorry.
I just want to let everyone know I have to go at 11:30.
Okay.
That might be a good closing time too.
So we're talking. So if I understand what we're talking about, it's not necessarily facilitator training. It's more of training people, like people coming together to wanting to do empathy circles and learn about empathy circles, and maybe how they could offer empathy circles for other people, right? But it's just the sounds like it's not to kind of, how do you become a facilitator of empathy circles? It's more of just learning how to do them, and how to be in them and experience them. Yeah.
Right.
For me, that's the first step, but then it is a train the trainer too, as well as if we do these town halls, we're kind of modeling it, and it's like, hey, would you like to do a class or something after, later too. So I think it's just that this is the beginning. That's kind of, there's a whole,
well, I think,
and it all opens. It's the first step. Yeah.
So you offer this, and it's like open to the public. There's no prerequisites, and it's like a weekend seminar on how you can utilize this in your life. And then you break that down, so you can, I don't know a lot about this, honestly, but Edwin has explained to me that there's lots of different places that it can kind of fit into different, methods of using. You can have different seminars afterwards, develop ones that are on those, and you can also have what would be like a train the trainer. And what I suggested to Edwin is, and it's a way of doing it that I've seen quite often, is where you have, it's quite an intense program. So you would have, it might be a year long, you would have a week at the beginning and a week at the end, where you would, or maybe not a week, but a few days, where you would actually get together face to face. And in the middle, you would meet once a month online and explain your experiences using this. And you would have certain assignments that you would be encouraged to do, like you would be encouraged to fold an empathy circle and explain how that worked. And you would look at different aspects of it, but you would get lots of practice over that year. With at the end, you would be kind of like considered a certified trainer in this, in a way. And then with the idea that then you are able to train other people, that you're a little bit more experienced in it than the person that has just taken the individual course, that you're using it for more extensive uses and stuff. But I think initially what you want is something where you're advertising this and moving it out into the public, and not everybody wants to become a trainer. Some people just want to learn more about the method.
Mm-hmm.
And you just do two like 6 or 7 hour, like a weekend seminar, so it's like 14 hours of training maybe.
Pretty good. I like it.
I think I don't know if anyone else has heard about Sidewalk Talk, if you've looked at that at all. So that's an interesting thing. We started in San Francisco, and it's where people go, they get some training, and then they go and you just are on the sidewalk with some chairs, and you're providing listening to people. And I think that their website, how they've structured things for trying to help people understand what Sidewalk Talk it is, and if you're interested in starting something in your community, how you do that. I think that might be a good model. I think of that as a good model for how we might proceed in terms of scaling. So you agree with that, Edwin?
Absolutely. I keep talking to Tracy. I say, you got the model. This is, you're so systematic. She's kind of coming out of the Silicon Valley, kind of design. Every kind of step is kind of laid out, and it's kind of you just have this package. You create your own, and your own Sidewalk Talk in your own, community in it. So it makes it very scalable too. Yeah.
So you would be
Absolutely.
very happy, Edwin, if it was something like that.
Absolutely. I think it's just, and she's actually using empathy circles to train her group. Their training is using empathy circles, and some of their meetings are actually using empathy circle too.
So that might be a thing for people to go and look at that and see what that's like, and we could talk about creating something like in relation to what they have done.
Yeah.
That might be one way to approach it.
I guess the question would be, what's the next step? Where is everyone in terms of moving, forward and involvement or?
Well, I see the next step is creating that basic nub, that intro course or whatever. I'm ready to kind of take a look at that PDF that you have, work on that, and then maybe, just mock up something, and then just to get the ball rolling. But I think that first intro is that's the nub, and then we can build on as need be.
I also think something that we haven't talked about at all that's important is the web component. So whatever pieces of information or demonstration that we create, like a PDF or a list of steps or a video that demonstrates, creating a container that is attractive, that is well organized, that is well sequenced, that is clear, that's very important. And so I don't know if you have anyone, Edwin, who might be willing to volunteer to create something that has those attributes, because I think that's an important part of whether people, once they decide they're interested, whether they continue to be attracted to it and are able to consume the materials that we've given them.
Yeah, I don't have we need sort of a web designer, someone who's can have that kind of that modern style for web design. I kind of have this old 1990s method techniques is when I started learning all of this. So I did put in a link to how-to empathy circles. That's like the basic instructions that I have. But this is, I'm putting in a link. This was sort of more of a development, just a lot of brainstorming around empathy circles. So I just put that link in there. So that's not like a public, how-to so much. It was more for keeping track of all the material, for other projects around this. So kind of aggregating that material. So I don't have those designers who can design a really aesthetically, pleasing site. But that site there can be for anybody. We can share editing, and it can be edited. And if you want to like place material and stuff there, you can use that.
So, quick question: when you put these links up, and they seem to be gone, how do I save them?
You have to copy and paste them. There's a chat window, that at the bottom, it says chat. If you click on that, it opens the link. It opens a chat window. You can just copy and paste those into a document or bookmark
Got it.
them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so maybe another meeting, kind of digest this. Linda, what do you think?
Sure. I'm coming to the end of the semester, so my students are all in a frenzy this week and next for the next couple of weeks. So sometimes I have to work around their schedule, but generally I try to be as flexible as possible, and I'm also available, evenings and weekends and stuff too. So you just decide what you need to do, and I'll try to fit myself into it.
Okay, John, any?
So the question was, what next steps?
Yeah, next steps.
I liked it. Was it Bill that said you'd like to take a crack at putting together the ideas that have been put out there? I like that.
Yeah, I want to. Okay, so I'd start with the PDF that you have, Edward, and then I might add some things about situational awareness just to throw it in, but it's not in, and then take it and then we mold it like clay. You can see my arms going, oh, I knocked my app paint. I'm so excited.
Yeah,
I agree that I think that's a great idea.
Yeah,
well,
we could all contribute to.
Yeah, Edwin, you had a PowerPoint that you'd use to do another presentation at one point, and I think you should. If that's not included on that page, you should include that too, because I just the quick look I took of it, I think that would some of that can be reused into form and help and molded into this program. So I would.
Yeah, that was actually, this is it here, is actually I'd like to do a presentation on this, maybe to our group, do it like an hour and a half. It'd be like an hour presentation on, building a culture of empathy. And I'd gone through the kind of putting a slideshow together. This is more like a didactic, but there's a little bit of experience, kind of an introduction component to like doing an empathy test, how do you test your empathy, kind of just stuff I put together, a bit of other stuff on yawning. So anyway, I'd like to present that at some point. So we can schedule something around that.
Sure.
I think the idea of having a lot supplementary material like that, like if you have a PowerPoint presentation and you make a presentation to us and you record it, so a slideshow with narration, and that's available on the training page for people that want that to listen to that. I think that's a good supplementary thing. I think a link to a couple of empathy circles on different topics, would be good for people that want to watch what does one look like. I think that those would be good elements.
Okay. Good. Then should we schedule a time again to or do that by email, or how?
Well, I think maybe the time to meet again would be after Bill has had a chance to work on the PDF. So maybe he could let us know. Maybe when he's done doing that, he could send it around, and then we could schedule a call after that. Okay.
And Linda, maybe we could schedule some time to do an empathy circle too. We're just kind of doing, so we can figure out a time where we can bring some, because our Wednesday meetings, our Wednesday and Tuesday meetings at 7 p.m. Pacific, we start with empathic listening. So if you want to come to those, we could also do a more in-depth one too. So for practicing.
Well, apparently the location where I am right now at the library, at this time of year, apparently, we had some problems on Wednesday, and apparently that's fairly typical this time of year. Just a kind of an overload of students preparing for final exams and stuff, and so they have lots of problems with sort of everything slowing down. And in for something like this, it's a lot of bandwidth. It obviously didn't work. So I'm probably better at this point to doing earlier in the day.
Okay.
Right. Or on weekends.
Okay, well,
But that changes, of course, in a couple of weeks when the semester's over. So.
Oh, by the way, we're going to be at UC Berkeley next Wednesday, 12 to 4 p.m. There's 2 classes there on empathy, and they have 25 students each. And they're going to come to the empathy tent. And they create these little snacks. They have, baggies of snacks. They bring, chips and, all kinds of stuff. They put them in the bags, and then they give them out to the students on Sproul Plaza, and they'll be doing it from the empathy tent. And we did it last semester, and it was really a lot of fun. And that was the first time I introduced them to empathy circles, how to do an empathy circle. So we might do some listening and empathy circle practice there too. So I think, Bill, were you thinking you could maybe come to that? Or I don't know, John, if you're interested in checking
Wednesday sounds good for me.
Okay. I think Dave will be there too. So
I won't be.
Yeah, you won't be.
All right.
Yeah, and I don't think I'm going to be able to make it either. I'm not positive about that. But I do need to go now.
Okay, yeah, so
John, it's great to see you again. And Linda, it's very nice meeting you.
It's nice meeting you too.
Good to see you, Lou.
Okay. Oh, Linda, do you want to hold on a second? I just we can. Oh, so yeah, so we could bring the meeting to an end. I think we have our kind of next steps and.
Yeah, give me about a week.
Okay.
Okay.
So, and Linda, we can try to, I don't know quite yet when exactly, but, do an empathy circle during the day.
Well, we talked about we were going to do one with a couple people here, and I sort of arranged it with
oh yeah, that's right.
one of my colleagues, and she's sort of just, since we were doing some other stuff in the same realm, and she's just sort of like disappeared off the face of the planet. So I have the impression that she's saying she wants to participate but doesn't really. That's the message I'm getting. So but I do have one other person who's seems to be interested. He's the caregiver for my son, so he's already very I think he's right on the page for this. So if we can, so that's 3, so we just need one more, right?
Yeah. Maybe Bill will join us, or
pardon me?
Maybe Bill would like to join us. So yeah, if you find like 3 people, 4, that would actually be 4, maybe 1 more if Bill wants to join us, or anyone from our empathy team.
At this point, I know what it is.
Okay, yeah, well, let's just let me know when that works, and we can.
Yeah, okay. I want to see if I can, instead of standing here holding my phone, to do that, I would like to see if I can book a room. And of course, this time of year it's a little bit tough because it's finals. But I'll see if I can book a room so that I have a bigger screen and we can work, since there'll be a couple of us, we can work more as a group together.
Okay, great. All right. Well, I guess we can close that. Is anybody close the meeting?
Nice talking with you all.
Okay, see you.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
All right, thanks.
Bye.
Nice to see you, John. Well,
Good to see you. Edwin, what happens on Tuesdays?
Tuesdays, there's this group through Indivisible. We have, it's like, how do we foster more unity within the Democratic Party and the political left? So we've got a group through Indivisible working on that. We're starting like a track, an empathy track for that. And we had our second meeting this Tuesday, and we just did empathic listening, through the whole process. And what actually emerged was the idea of holding an empathy circle town hall with the candidates for Assembly District 15. Because as I was mentioning, there's 8 or 9 candidates running. Someone in the group had a connection with, one of the city council members from Berkeley, right after the call, she emailed that person. We had our first person willing to take part. So it's kind of that having empathy circles with public figures kind of project. So, if you're interested in that, the idea was, we talked about it in the other Wednesday group that, 9 people is going to be too much. Maybe we could break it into 2 and, one of us would facilitate and we'd kind of introduce, empathy circles. And the topic right now would be, I think, this is all kind of works, kind of still open. We're still working work in progress. The question is, how might we foster more unity among either the left or, people in general, and have the candidates talk about that. So we kind of do, and they would be using empathic listening, with each other.
Well, I have an idea. Is as question to speak about something. They pick contentious issues. Pick, like, how do you feel about, I don't know, whatever. I'm not sure what left people are in conflict about, but something that would be a potentially polarizing topic. But then, because it's an empathy circle, people would just be speaking and reflecting back, and that would start to build. As long as it didn't trigger a fight, an argument broke down the circle, it would actually trigger more kind of coming together and
I see.
Right? Just because you picked some topics that people tend to disagree on the left, but then you use the circle to make it, totally.
Yeah. So the question would be: is how might we find those challenging topics? We could ask the candidates themselves, what do you see as a challenging topic? If we did a couple of them, I could facilitate one if you wanted to facilitate one, something like that, get you involved.
But yeah, could have been. Do you think, was it better to vote for Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders?
Yeah.
But yeah,
we also thought of doing a role play. So we would get together just online, do the question. We would know who the candidates are, a picture of them, a little bio. You kind of read that and then you do a role play. So we could actually try a role play of being the candidate, just as a sort of as a warm up, or, maybe doing a pre-circle, sort of a pre-type circle online, and then we move towards doing it in public, like through Indivisible, they meet at the Finish Hall in Berkeley. So, we could get like 5 of the candidates, 4 or 5. We have one circle and maybe one later in another with the other ones in Richmond or something, So it's kind of all in our district. So we're kind of like this is the first, it's kind of a different way of them relating versus, debates and that model. So we're trying to create this new model of using empathy, and then we're demonstrating it. And it's kind of like an intro to people saying, yeah, you can take these empathy circle workshops or trainings or whatever too. So it could be a kind of a gateway. Could be reproducible to other communities as well. So.
Yeah, no, that's all exciting. So yeah, so on Tuesdays, is that a Zoom call?
It's a Zoom call, same URL. It's we'll meet next Tuesday to kind of work on this and kind of flesh it out. And
what time on Tuesday?
7:00.
Oh, it's the same time as Wednesday.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and there's Will. He's really gung ho about this, so he's kind of like organizing it and reaching out. And we had a physical meeting, and there was like 10 people, interested in the project. So
interested in the
Unity. There's like kind of in the Unity project, because there's a lot of, in terms of needs out there, the Democrats are really scared about all the divisions within the left. So there's this, they're looking for ways of bringing people together. So that was the general project, but then I'm doing this kind of separate empathy track to, use empathy and empathy circles as a way of addressing the problem. So
yeah, Yeah, no, that all sounds good. I'm just making a note. So you just the same URL for.
Yeah, the same Zoom URL, and I think I have there's actually a Facebook. Let me just give you the link to Facebook. Then if you can kind of keep track of the event there.
Yeah, I think I have that somewhere in one of your.
Oh yeah, I sent an email with yeah. So it's.
But I don't know if I saved it in a good place.
It'll take a second. Should be able to bring it up.
But it's the same as the one we're on now, right? So.
It's the same URL.
But you have to send. It's a different link though, because it's a different.
I just was going to give you the Facebook event for it.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, just that way you can kind of join the event, and it kind of gets it on your calendar. Let's see, what is it? The 5th. Upcoming. Oh, I'm very. Okay, so this is a group. This is a Facebook group for the overall project.
You just sent?
Yeah, I put it in the chat window.
Oh, in the chat window. Okay, let me.
And website. Oh, yeah, this is just some notes. Yeah, this is it's kind of like the home page, kind of a Facebook work group, next meeting event. There we go. December 5th. So that's the actual Facebook event. The last one's the Facebook event. So if you join that event, it'll kind of keep it in your Facebook calendar.
Just yeah, saving these in place. Okay. All right, Edwin.
All right.
Good. It's good stuff. I think I see some good potentials. So
yeah, I think it fits with you're interested in the social action stuff. I think that's what we're doing here. So it's great to have you involved with all your skill and background, and so plus being in this district, you're kind of in the same political district. There's all this. It'll be really great, to have that.
I'm working on something related to microgrid energy, and there's a person who's really into that I met at this conference, and the idea of bringing microgrids, trying to bring in microgrid kind of technology to Richmond and link that up with social justice issues. And a lot of it will be about, having conversations and facilitating people listening to each other.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there could be a lot of application of what we're talking about here to that project as well.
Yeah, there's something we could talk about too, is this notion of social justice versus social empathy.
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of problems with the social justice frame. Like conservatives hate it because they're in a war against the social justice warriors.
Right.
And the social justice warriors are going into this identity politics and are very combative, and it's like identity.
Yes.
And it's about a battle fighting for self-interest versus fighting for a culture of empathy, where a transformative relational. So it's trying to create a new frame that's kind of really clear about this is, and I think that's where your heart is basically too.
Yeah, no, I like that. Reframing it in the language of social empathy.
Yeah.
Nice.
And I think kind of being able to lay that out and explain it to people, is I think a lot of people have that desire, but it gets kind of, there's a lack of clarity in terms of what, they get kind of distracted into kind of a combative space instead of a transformative, empathic space. So.
Yeah, no, totally. I think that's a great insight. Good idea.
Okay, well, good.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, we'll be in touch with you next week then.
Okay.